Most people believe the worst moments of their lives arrive loudly enough to warn them before everything changes forever emotionally. A phone call in the middle of the night. A knock at the door. Police lights outside the house. But sometimes disaster begins quietly with something so small and ordinary that nobody around you notices the exact second your life starts collapsing psychologically. One message, one sentence, one memory you spent years trying to bury suddenly finding its way back toward you again emotionally. And for 38-year-old Rachel Monroe, that moment arrived at exactly 1:43 in the morning while rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows of a house that had not truly felt safe in years. Rachel sat alone in darkness, illuminated only by the pale glow of her phone screen, emotionally exhausted after another 14-hour emergency room shift at St. Vincent Memorial Hospital. Her body ached from exhaustion in the familiar way healthcare workers stop discussing after enough years psychologically. The divorce changed her routines slowly over time until silence itself became a permanent part of the house emotionally. Her teenage son, Ethan, slept down the hallway, while Rachel remained awake staring blankly at half-finished hospital paperwork spread across the bed beside her. Most nights ended this way now. Sleepless, quiet, emotionally numb enough that exhaustion felt easier than thinking too deeply about the life she used to imagine for herself psychologically. Then her phone vibrated. Unknown sender. No profile picture. No contact information emotionally. Only one sentence. I found the video. Rachel froze instantly. Not surprised. Terrified. Because there was never supposed to be a video. That detail matters more than people understand emotionally. Because fear changes completely when someone mentions evidence you believed no longer existed psychologically. Rachel's breathing became uneven immediately while her hands trembled hard enough, almost dropping the phone emotionally. 8 years disappeared inside her mind all at once. Hospital lights, screaming monitors, blood on surgical gloves, security cameras mounted above emergency room hallways psychologically. Memories she spent nearly a decade forcing herself not to revisit suddenly returned with violent clarity emotionally. And then another message appeared. You should have told the truth that night. Rachel stared at the screen, unable moving psychologically because deep down she already understood something horrifying emotionally. Whoever sent the messages knew exactly which night destroyed her life permanently. The same night nobody at the hospital spoke about publicly anymore. The same night official records quietly disappeared afterward psychologically. The same night Dr. Adrian Cole vanished from the city completely, without explanation emotionally. Rachel immediately locked the bedroom door before pulling old laptop from beneath the bed psychologically. Panic replaced exhaustion instantly. She searched through archived folders she had not opened in years emotionally. Deleted files, corrupted backups, encrypted hospital records. Her fingers moved frantically across the keyboard while rain intensified outside the house psychologically. Most people watching this story will probably assume innocent people react calmly when confronted unexpectedly emotionally. But guilt behaves differently. Even partial guilt. Even silence disguised as self-protection psychologically. And Rachel Monroe had spent 8 years protecting herself emotionally. She deleted old storage folders first, then external drive backups, then cloud archives she thought nobody else even knew existed psychologically. File after file disappeared while panic spread through her chest emotionally, because the messages confirmed impossible truth she refused accepting for years. Someone preserved evidence. Someone watched quietly while everyone involved convinced themselves the past stayed buried permanently psychologically. Then Rachel noticed movement outside her bedroom window emotionally. Police lights reflecting faintly across neighboring houses several streets away. At least that's what she tried convincing herself initially psychologically. But when she pulled the curtains slightly apart, she noticed dark vehicle parked across the street with headlights off emotionally. Someone sat inside watching the house motionlessly. Maybe coincidence. Maybe paranoia. But fear changes ordinary details into threats once people believe their secrets are no longer hidden psychologically. Rachel stepped away from the window immediately. Then another memory surfaced emotionally. Interrogation room. Bright fluorescent lights. Woman crying uncontrollably while answering questions psychologically. Rachel herself. 8 years earlier emotionally. That memory never fully disappeared no matter how hard she tried suppressing it psychologically, because trauma does not vanish simply because people stop discussing it publicly. It waits. Quietly. Patiently emotionally. And sometimes all it takes is one sentence appearing unexpectedly on glowing phone screen to bring everything back completely. I found the video. Rachel whispered quietly to herself. No, no, no. Not because she feared embarrassment. Not because she feared scandal emotionally. Because if the video truly existed, it meant someone else knew the truth about what happened inside St. Vincent Memorial Hospital that night psychologically. And the terrifying part was realizing she no longer knew whether the messages came from someone seeking justice or someone seeking revenge. Fast flashes of memory kept interrupting her thoughts emotionally. Security footage glitching unexpectedly inside emergency room corridors. Dr. Adrian Cole arguing aggressively with administrators behind closed doors psychologically. Medical records changing after midnight. Nurses refusing eye contact afterward emotionally. Hospital executives insisting everyone involved move forward professionally, while quietly removing entire sections of archived data psychologically. Rachel spent years convincing herself silence protected her son, protected her career, protected what remained of her life emotionally. But deep down another truth existed beneath all of it psychologically. Silence also protected everyone else involved. That realization became impossible ignoring once the messages continued arriving emotionally. Unknown numbers. Deleted attachments reappearing. Corrupted folders restoring themselves somehow psychologically. And every message carried same terrifying implication emotionally. Someone never stopped watching. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because Rachel Monroe's story is not simply about one terrifying message arriving late at night emotionally. It's about what happens when people spend years building emotional survival around secrets they hope never return psychologically. Most viewers probably believe they would immediately tell the truth if placed inside impossible situation emotionally. But fear changes morality slowly. Careers, children, futures, reputations. Once enough people become emotionally dependent on silence, the truth itself begins feeling dangerous psychologically. And somewhere outside Rachel Monroe's house that night, someone already knew she was afraid again. The most disturbing part of stories like this is realizing danger rarely announces itself clearly emotionally. Sometimes it waits years before returning psychologically. Sometimes it allows people to rebuild normal lives completely before reopening wounds they believed healed emotionally. Rachel Monroe spent nearly a decade convincing herself the past stayed buried. Then one message appeared, and suddenly the past started breathing again. To everyone around her, Rachel Monroe looked like someone who survived life with remarkable discipline emotionally. 38 years old, emergency room nurse. Respected professionally by co-workers who trusted her calmness during chaos psychologically. Divorced but stable. Quiet suburban routine. Responsible mother raising teenage son while working impossible hospital shifts without complaint emotionally. People described Rachel the same way for years afterward. Reliable, intelligent, compassionate under pressure psychologically. The kind of person families cling to emotionally during the worst moments of their lives, because her voice always sounded controlled even when emergency rooms collapsed into panic around her psychologically. But people often confuse emotional control with emotional peace. And Rachel Monroe had not experienced peace in years. Because beneath the ordinary routines, hospital schedules, grocery store conversations, and quiet suburban evenings, Rachel carried memory she never fully escaped psychologically. One night, one decision, one conversation inside St. Vincent Memorial Hospital that nobody publicly questioned afterward emotionally because the official story sounded clean enough for people wanting reassurance instead of truth psychologically. Until now. The terrifying thing about buried secrets is how ordinary life can appear while someone quietly carries them emotionally. Rachel still attended school meetings with Ethan, still picked up coffee before overnight shifts, still smiled politely at neighbors while pretending nothing inside her life remained unfinished psychologically. But privately, she built entire emotional survival around avoiding specific memories. Certain hallways inside the hospital, certain names, certain dates emotionally connected to events she forced herself not to revisit psychologically. Especially the name Adrian Cole. Dr. Adrian Cole once represented everything people admired inside emergency medicine emotionally. Brilliant under pressure, charismatic, respected by patients and hospital leadership alike psychologically. Rachel worked beside him for years before the night everything changed emotionally. They trusted each other professionally in ways difficult explaining to people outside trauma environments psychologically. Emergency rooms create emotional bonds quickly because survival often depends on silent understanding between exhausted people making impossible decisions emotionally. And that is exactly why Rachel's fear felt so immediate after the messages began. Because the messages did not sound random psychologically. They sounded informed, personal emotionally, as though someone knew details hidden beneath official reports and forgotten hospital archives psychologically. That realization destroyed Rachel's ability pretending coincidence explained what was happening emotionally, especially after the messages continued arriving night after night without stopping. Unknown numbers, no caller identification, no demands for money, no explanations psychologically. Only fragments designed reopening memories Rachel spent years suppressing emotionally. You remember what happened. I know why he disappeared. The footage still exists. Each message pulled her deeper into panic psychologically because whoever sent them understood exactly which emotional pressure points still terrified her most. Rachel began sleeping with lights on emotionally, double-checking locks repeatedly throughout the night psychologically. Every vibration from her phone triggered adrenaline immediately, because uncertainty becomes torture once someone realizes another person may know their darkest secret emotionally. Then strange things started happening around her. Deleted files reappeared mysteriously inside old storage drives psychologically. Hospital documents Rachel destroyed years earlier suddenly appeared restored on backup systems emotionally. One evening she returned home after work and found her garage door partially open, even though she clearly remembered closing it before leaving psychologically. Another night, Ethan casually mentioned unfamiliar car parked outside the house earlier that afternoon emotionally. Dark sedan, engine running, never moved psychologically. Rachel tried dismissing everything logically at first because rationalization becomes survival mechanism for emotionally exhausted people psychologically. Maybe the messages were elaborate prank. Maybe anxiety distorted ordinary events emotionally. Maybe someone from the hospital discovered old records accidentally, and curiosity escalated into harassment psychologically. But then hospital security footage started disappearing again. That detail changed everything emotionally. Rachel noticed it accidentally during overnight shift after small altercation near emergency entrance psychologically. Security staff attempted reviewing footage only to discover several hours corrupted unexpectedly emotionally. Most employees ignored it because technical failures happen constantly inside aging hospital systems psychologically. But Rachel froze immediately when she heard the explanation emotionally. Corrupted footage. That exact phrase. Because 8 years earlier, the same explanation appeared after the incident nobody discussed anymore psychologically. And suddenly the fear stopped feeling irrational. Rachel started noticing strangers watching her publicly emotionally. Not dramatically, quietly. Briefly psychologically, man sitting alone inside coffee shop maintaining eye contact too long emotionally. Woman standing near pharmacy pretending to text while observing Rachel through reflection psychologically. Hospital visitor asking oddly specific questions about old staff members emotionally. Tiny moments individually harmless perhaps, but together they created overwhelming sensation Rachel could no longer ignore psychologically. Someone was looking for something, and somehow it connected back toward that night. The worst part was realizing Rachel no longer trusted her own perception emotionally. Fear changes how people interpret reality psychologically. Ordinary coincidences start feeling threatening. Harmless interactions suddenly seem deliberate emotionally. Rachel kept asking herself same question repeatedly late at night while staring at her glowing phone screen psychologically. Was someone truly targeting her? Or was guilt finally destroying her ability to feel safe emotionally? That question followed her constantly until the morning everything became undeniably real psychologically. Rachel arrived early for shift at St. Vincent Memorial emotionally, hoping work might distract her from the messages and growing paranoia psychologically. But while reviewing patient records near nurse's station, she noticed something buried inside hospital system alerts emotionally. Archived file access notification. Old emergency room case. Date: 8 years earlier. The exact night Rachel spent nearly a decade trying to forget psychologically. Someone accessed restricted hospital records connected to the incident. Not recently. Hours earlier emotionally. Rachel's stomach dropped immediately because those records were never supposed to exist anymore psychologically. Portions had been deleted officially after internal review years ago emotionally. Others sealed under administrative authorization. Very few people inside the hospital even remembered the case clearly anymore psychologically. Yet someone not only found the archived records, they accessed them intentionally. And suddenly Rachel Monroe realized something terrifying emotionally. Whoever sent the messages was not guessing. They already knew where to look. Long before the anonymous messages started appearing in the middle of the night, Rachel Monroe built her entire identity around helping people survive their worst moments emotionally. Emergency medicine changes human beings slowly over time in ways most outsiders never fully understand psychologically. People imagine hospital work as dramatic rescues, emotional speeches, and life-changing moments compressed into short bursts of chaos emotionally. But the reality is much quieter and far heavier psychologically. Endless exhaustion, constant trauma, families collapsing emotionally in waiting rooms, patients dying while machines continue making mechanical sounds nobody forgets afterward psychologically. Rachel spent nearly 16 years living inside that environment, and eventually it reshaped her emotionally. At 38, she carried herself with calm professionalism people immediately trusted psychologically. Patients relaxed when Rachel entered rooms because her voice rarely shook even during emergencies emotionally. Younger nurses admired her ability, staying composed while others panicked psychologically. Doctors depended on her because Rachel noticed details most exhausted staff members overlooked emotionally. But emotional control comes with cost. Years of witnessing trauma slowly hardened certain parts of her psychologically until vulnerability itself started feeling dangerous emotionally, especially after the divorce. Rachel never talked publicly about why the marriage ended because she genuinely struggled explaining it to herself psychologically. Nothing dramatic happened emotionally. No explosive betrayal. No sudden collapse. Instead, the relationship slowly disappeared beneath years of emotional exhaustion, overnight shifts, and unspoken distance psychologically. By the time the divorce finalized, Rachel already felt emotionally disconnected from most parts of her life except work. So she buried herself deeper inside the hospital afterward. More shifts, longer hours, less sleep emotionally. Work became safest place psychologically because hospitals leave little room for self-reflection during constant emergencies emotionally. If Rachel kept moving, thinking, treating patients, and solving problems, she could avoid sitting alone with memories she no longer trusted herself to confront psychologically. But loneliness still found its way into her life quietly. The house became painfully silent after Ethan started spending more time alone emotionally. Friends stopped inviting Rachel places eventually because she almost always declined psychologically. Her routines narrowed into predictable cycles emotionally. Hospital, grocery store, home, repeat. She convinced herself isolation represented stability psychologically, control, survival emotionally. And perhaps that is why the anonymous messages affected her so deeply once they began. Because Rachel Monroe already lived emotionally close to the edge of exhaustion psychologically, the messages did not create fear from nothing emotionally. They reopened emotional fractures she spent years trying to seal shut psychologically. At the center of those fractures stood Dr. Adrian Cole. Before disappearing completely from public life, Adrian Cole represented everything ambitious hospitals wanted emotionally. Brilliant emergency physician, calm during trauma, charismatic enough patients remembered him positively years later psychologically. Younger staff members admired him almost immediately because Adrian carried himself with confidence that made impossible situations seem manageable emotionally. He moved quickly, spoke carefully, and handled pressure in ways Rachel respected deeply psychologically. For years they worked side by side. And somewhere during those endless overnight shifts, trust formed between them emotionally. Not romance, not scandal, something more complicated psychologically. Shared trauma creates emotional closeness difficult explaining outside high-pressure environments emotionally. Rachel and Adrian understood each other because they witnessed the same things nightly. Death, fear, human desperation psychologically. They became emotionally dependent on each other professionally long before either noticed it happening, which is exactly why the hospital controversy destroyed everything afterward. Officially, Adrian Cole disappeared voluntarily after emotional breakdown connected to workplace pressure emotionally. At least that was the public explanation psychologically. The hospital quietly removed his name from internal discussions. Former coworkers stopped mentioning him eventually emotionally. New employees never learned details beyond vague references to an old incident years earlier psychologically. But Rachel never fully accepted the official version emotionally because she knew Adrian better than most people inside that hospital. And Adrian Cole was not the kind of man who vanished without explanation psychologically. That lingering uncertainty haunted Rachel privately long before the messages arrived emotionally. Especially because Adrian once told her something during overnight shift years earlier that never fully left her mind psychologically. The truth doesn't disappear, he said quietly while reviewing patient charts. People just stop looking for it. At the time, Rachel laughed it off emotionally. Dark hospital philosophy from emotionally exhausted doctor psychologically. But years later those words became devastating because Rachel slowly realized Adrian may have been warning her emotionally long before everything collapsed. Meanwhile, another person quietly entered the story. Detective Naomi Reeves. Unlike most investigators assigned cold cases, Naomi Reeves built reputation around refusing easy conclusions emotionally. Sharp instincts, emotionally detached demeanor, obsessive attention to inconsistencies psychologically. Other detectives often described her as exhausting because Naomi rarely accepted official narratives without digging deeper emotionally. And unfortunately for Rachel Monroe, Naomi recently reopened forgotten hospital incident connected to Adrian Cole's disappearance. Not publicly, quietly. That detail terrified Rachel more psychologically because public investigations create noise emotionally. Quiet investigations create certainty psychologically. Naomi Reeves did not reopen the case for headlines. She reopened it because something about the official story never made sense emotionally. And people like Naomi Reeves rarely stop once they begin asking questions. Rachel first learned about Naomi's involvement through former coworker who mentioned detective requesting archived staff schedules and security records emotionally. The moment Rachel heard Naomi Reeves's name, panic returned instantly psychologically because buried beneath years of silence existed terrifying possibility emotionally. What if someone finally started looking again? That fear became impossible separating from her relationship with Ethan emotionally. Her teenage son noticed changes before anyone else psychologically. Teenagers observe emotional tension far more carefully than parents realize emotionally. Ethan Monroe already carried quiet distance toward Rachel after years watching work consume most of her energy psychologically. But recently his behavior shifted further emotionally. More suspicious, more observant psychologically. He started asking uncomfortable questions. Why was Rachel deleting files late at night emotionally? Why did she keep checking the windows repeatedly psychologically? Why did unknown numbers keep calling her phone before midnight emotionally? Rachel dismissed everything with exhausted half-answers because protecting Ethan remained her strongest emotional instinct psychologically. But deep down she understood another painful truth emotionally. Children always recognize when parents are hiding fear. And Ethan Monroe had started realizing his mother was terrified of something she refused naming aloud psychologically. That realization hollowed something inside her emotionally, because random hackers do not target forgotten emergency room archives from nearly a decade earlier psychologically. Whoever accessed those files knew exactly where to look emotionally. More importantly, they understood which records still frightened Rachel Monroe after all these years. Then the hidden folders started returning. Rachel would permanently delete corrupted backups from old hard drives emotionally only to find copies restored again days later psychologically. Encrypted files she buried inside forgotten storage directories suddenly reappeared with modified timestamps emotionally. Once she even discovered folder named Look Again sitting openly on her laptop desktop despite knowing with absolute certainty she never created it psychologically. The folder contained only one thing: corrupted security footage thumbnail from St. Vincent Memorial Hospital emotionally. Rachel slammed the laptop shut immediately. That was the moment fear stopped feeling abstract psychologically. And then someone entered her garage. Not robbed it. Not vandalized anything emotionally. Just entered. Rachel discovered it late one evening after returning from another emotionally exhausting hospital shift psychologically. The interior garage light was already on when she pulled into the driveway emotionally. Small detail. Easy to dismiss rubamai psychologically. Except Rachel always turned the light off before leaving because routine became survival mechanism after years inside emergency medicine emotionally. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing obviously disturbed psychologically. But a storage cabinet near the back wall stood partially open emotionally. Inside were old paperwork boxes Rachel had not touched in years psychologically. Hospital tax records, divorce documents, archived files emotionally connected to period of her life she avoided revisiting psychologically. Someone had gone through them. Carefully, quietly emotionally. After that, the phone call started. Always late at night. Unknown numbers. No voice psychologically. Only silence. At first, Rachel hung up immediately emotionally, but eventually curiosity mixed with fear until she started listening longer psychologically. Breathing sometimes. Faint movement. Once she thought she heard hospital monitor alarm somewhere in the background emotionally before the call disconnected abruptly. The psychological damage became unbearable because uncertainty destroys people slowly emotionally. Rachel stopped sleeping properly completely. Coffee replaced meals. She checked locks repeatedly throughout the night psychologically. At work, she started watching coworkers carefully, wondering who might secretly know more than they admitted emotionally. Every conversation felt loaded somehow. Every glance suspicious psychologically. Most terrifying of all, Rachel became convinced someone understood the truth about what happened 8 years earlier. Not rumors. Not partial details emotionally. The actual truth. And whoever it was wanted Rachel Monroe terrified before revealing themselves completely psychologically. That breaking point finally arrived 4 nights later. Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table long after Ethan went upstairs emotionally. Rain battered the windows again, just like the night the first message arrived psychologically. Her laptop glowed dimly across stacks of unopened bills and hospital paperwork emotionally. Another anonymous email waited inside her inbox. No subject line, only encrypted attachment, and one sentence underneath. You've lied long enough. Rachel stared at the message for nearly 20 minutes psychologically. Every instinct warned her not opening the file emotionally. But fear eventually transforms into something dangerous psychologically. Need. The need to know how much someone else understands emotionally. With trembling hands, Rachel finally opened the attachment. At first, the footage looked corrupted psychologically. Distorted static. Flickering timestamps. Broken audio emotionally. Then gradually the image stabilized. St. Vincent Memorial Hospital. Emergency room corridor. 8 years earlier. Rachel stopped breathing for a moment psychologically because she recognized the night immediately emotionally. The camera angle overlooked Trauma Bay entrance during one of the most chaotic overnight emergencies of her entire career psychologically. Nurses sprinting between rooms. Doctors shouting instructions. Alarms screaming emotionally. The footage shook slightly from damaged recording compression, but Rachel still recognized herself moving frantically through the frames psychologically. Then she saw the patient. The same patient whose death officially disappeared beneath altered reports and administrative silence afterward emotionally. The memories returned violently. Medical equipment alarms screaming uncontrollably psychologically. Blood covering surgical gloves emotionally. Staff panicking as monitors flatlined repeatedly psychologically. Rachel shouting across the trauma room while Dr. Adrian Cole argued with another physician emotionally. Security timestamps glitching across the screen almost as though someone attempted editing the footage years earlier psychologically. Then Rachel heard her own voice. Terrified. Angry emotionally. You made the wrong call. The footage abruptly cut. Black screen. Several seconds of silence psychologically. Then new clip appeared. Smaller room. Different camera angle emotionally. Dr. Adrian Cole stood alone, facing someone off-screen psychologically. His face looked exhausted in ways Rachel had never forgotten emotionally. If this gets out, Adrian whispered carefully, both of us are finished. Rachel physically recoiled from the screen. Because she remembered that conversation, or at least fragments of it psychologically. Enough to know Adrian was not speaking hypothetically emotionally. Enough to remember what happened afterward. Then suddenly, the power inside Rachel's house shut off completely. Darkness swallowed everything instantly. Rachel froze. For one terrifying second, the only sound was heavy rain outside psychologically. Then the window alarm activated. Sharp mechanical screaming echoing through the house emotionally. Someone was outside. Rachel stumbled backward from the kitchen table while adrenaline exploded through her chest psychologically. Every light remained dead. Her phone screen illuminated the room weakly while the alarm continued blaring emotionally. Through the darkness, she heard movement outside, near the side of the house psychologically. Slow footsteps. Crunching gravel emotionally. Rachel wanted to call police immediately, but fear stopped her psychologically. Because deep down she already knew this was not random intrusion emotionally. Whoever stood outside understood exactly what she had just watched. The recovered footage still glowed faintly on the laptop screen psychologically. Rachel stared at the timestamp buried in the corner emotionally. 8 years old. Officially deleted long ago. Destroyed during hospital archive purge after the incident psychologically. And yet someone secretly preserved the footage the entire time. Which meant one horrifying thing emotionally. The truth Rachel Monroe spent years trying to bury had never truly disappeared at all. By the following week, the story Rachel Monroe spent 8 years trying to forget had escaped quietly back into public consciousness emotionally. At first, it appeared only in small corners of the internet psychologically. Anonymous discussion forums. True crime communities. Archived hospital rumor threads, people previously ignored emotionally. Someone started posting fragments from the recovered security footage without explanation psychologically. Short clips, corrupted timestamps, blurred images of emergency room chaos emotionally. Nothing definitive enough proving what happened inside St. Vincent Memorial Hospital that night, but enough to reopen questions nobody asked publicly in years psychologically. Then local media noticed. And once media attention begins attaching itself to hidden scandal, fear spreads faster than facts emotionally. Within days, reporters started revisiting the patient death officially ruled accidental nearly a decade earlier psychologically. Old headlines resurfaced. Former hospital employees received interview requests emotionally. Commentators questioned why so many archived records connected to the case disappeared mysteriously after internal review psychologically. Television anchors described the situation cautiously, at first emotionally. Possible negligence, administrative failures, missing evidence psychologically. But online speculation became far more aggressive. Some people believed Rachel Monroe caused fatal medical mistake emotionally and spent years hiding behind hospital protection psychologically. Others insisted Dr. Adrian Cole staged his own disappearance after threatening to expose corruption emotionally. Anonymous posts accused hospital administrators of covering up criminal negligence psychologically. A growing number of people became convinced the anonymous sender targeting Rachel was not exposing truth at all emotionally. They were blackmailing her. And perhaps most disturbing of all, some theories claimed Detective Naomi Reeves intentionally manipulated evidence herself to reopen dead case for career attention psychologically. That constant uncertainty poisoned everything emotionally because nobody fully understood which parts of the story were real anymore psychologically. Rumors multiplied faster than evidence. Public outrage grew louder than facts emotionally. Rachel watched her own life transform into internet speculation while strangers debated her guilt online psychologically. And deep down, she understood why people doubted her emotionally. Because even Rachel Monroe no longer trusted herself completely. The recovered footage replayed constantly inside her mind psychologically. Every argument with Adrian Cole, every corrupted timestamp, every memory she previously forced herself not to examine emotionally. The more she revisited that night, the less certain she became about the official sequence of events psychologically, which is exactly what fear does to human memory emotionally. It blurs certainty, and once uncertainty enters traumatic memories, guilt grows around it like infection psychologically. Meanwhile, Detective Naomi Reeves continued investigating quietly. Unlike the media frenzy exploding publicly emotionally, Naomi approached the case with cold precision psychologically. She avoided television interviews completely, ignored speculation, refused public statements emotionally. Instead, she focused on details buried beneath years of altered paperwork and administrative silence psychologically. And the deeper Naomi dug, the worse everything became. Missing hospital archives, unauthorized deletions inside internal systems emotionally, medical reports modified after official filing psychologically, witness statements rewritten during administrative review emotionally. Naomi discovered entire sections of the emergency room security system were manually erased less than 48 hours after the patient died psychologically. Staff interviews from that period contained inconsistencies too specific, ignoring emotionally. Nurses remembered different timelines. Doctors contradicted one another repeatedly psychologically. Several former employees suddenly refused speaking about the case entirely after initially agreeing to cooperate emotionally. To Naomi Reeves, those patterns meant one thing. Someone worked very hard ensuring the truth never surfaced publicly psychologically. And Rachel Monroe stood directly at the center of it. That realization terrified Rachel more than the anonymous messages emotionally, because Naomi Reeves was not driven by paranoia or revenge psychologically. She followed evidence, patterns, behavioral inconsistencies emotionally. People like Naomi rarely stop investigating once they believe a larger truth exists underneath official narratives psychologically. Rachel sensed suspicion growing each time they spoke. Naomi's questions became sharper emotionally, more personal psychologically. Why did Adrian Cole contact you privately after the incident? Why were archived records deleted from terminal assigned to your department? Why did multiple witnesses suddenly change statements after meeting hospital administrators? Rachel answered carefully, every time emotionally. Partial truths. Defensive explanations psychologically. But deep down she recognized something devastating emotionally. Naomi Reeves no longer viewed her as frightened witness. She viewed Rachel as someone hiding critical information. And unfortunately, she was right. The psychological pressure finally started breaking Rachel apart emotionally. Sleep disappeared first completely, then appetite, then emotional stability psychologically. Rachel spent entire nights rewatching the recovered security footage frame by frame, searching for details she previously ignored emotionally. Coffee cups accumulated beside her laptop. Curtains remained permanently closed psychologically. She stopped trusting coworkers after noticing conversations suddenly ending when she entered hospital rooms emotionally. Even Ethan noticed the deterioration. Her teenage son started asking why Rachel barely slept anymore psychologically, why she kept checking the driveway repeatedly before leaving for work emotionally, why she looked terrified every time her phone vibrated psychologically. Rachel dismissed his concerns constantly, because admitting the truth aloud would make everything feel emotionally real in ways she still could not survive psychologically. So instead, she started hiding evidence herself. External drives buried beneath old clothing emotionally. Printed documents sealed inside storage boxes psychologically. Password-protected backups hidden across cloud accounts Rachel hoped nobody could access emotionally. Every decision became contradictory psychologically. Part of her wanted the truth exposed completely emotionally. Another part still desperately wanted survival. That internal conflict destroyed her psychologically because guilt behaves differently when mixed with fear emotionally. Rachel no longer knew whether she protected herself, Ethan, Adrian Cole's memory, or the hospital administration psychologically. Maybe all of them. Maybe none emotionally. Then came the discovery that changed everything permanently. It happened late one night, while Rachel reviewed archived financial records connected to Adrian Cole psychologically. Detective Naomi Reeves had quietly uncovered something disturbing earlier that day emotionally. Adrian's identity continued appearing in isolated government databases years after his official disappearance psychologically. Driver's license renewals, medical insurance activity, apartment utility registrations emotionally. Someone used Adrian Cole's identity repeatedly long after he supposedly vanished voluntarily psychologically. At first, Rachel assumed identity theft emotionally. Common enough. Easy explanation psychologically. But then Naomi uncovered security image attached to one transaction emotionally. Blurry. Poor quality. But unmistakably Adrian Cole. Alive. Recorded nearly 3 years after the hospital incident psychologically. Rachel stared at the image, unable breathing properly emotionally, because the official story suddenly collapsed entirely. Adrian did not simply disappear psychologically. Someone helped him disappear. Or perhaps worse, someone controlled what happened to him afterward emotionally. That realization changed the entire emotional architecture of the case psychologically. Because if Adrian Cole remained alive after all those years, then someone else knew the full truth too emotionally. Someone powerful enough preserving evidence, altering records, and hiding a missing doctor while the world believed he vanished psychologically. And suddenly Rachel Monroe understood something horrifying emotionally. The conspiracy surrounding that night inside St. Vincent Memorial Hospital had never ended. It simply waited silently for someone to start looking again. The truth Rachel Monroe spent 8 years running from was never as simple as one mistake inside a crowded emergency room emotionally. That is what made the entire situation so devastating psychologically. People often imagine catastrophic moments arriving clearly enough that everyone involved immediately understands exactly what happened and who deserves blame emotionally. But real trauma rarely works that way. Real trauma unfolds inside confusion, pressure, exhaustion, fear, and impossible decisions made within seconds psychologically. And 8 years earlier, inside St. Vincent Memorial Hospital, all of those things collided at once. The patient arrived just after midnight emotionally. Male, mid-30s, critically injured following violent vehicle collision psychologically. But what made the case different was not the injuries themselves emotionally. It was the family connected to him psychologically, politically influential, extremely wealthy, deep relationships with hospital leadership and city officials emotionally. Rachel remembered administrators suddenly appearing near trauma rooms unusually fast that night psychologically. Phone calls already happening before the patient even reached surgery emotionally. Tension spreading through the hospital in ways everyone noticed, but nobody questioned aloud psychologically. Rachel Monroe and Dr. Adrian Cole led the emergency response together. At first, everything looked survivable emotionally. Critical. Complicated, but survivable psychologically. Then something went wrong. Even after all those years, Rachel still struggled replaying the exact sequence clearly inside her mind emotionally, because traumatic memories distort under emotional pressure psychologically. Equipment alarms screaming. Blood loss accelerating. Staff shouting conflicting instructions emotionally. Adrian Cole making rapid surgical decisions, while administrators crowded outside operating room demanding updates psychologically. And then, the catastrophic error. One wrong medical decision made under impossible pressure emotionally. A mistake measured in seconds psychologically. But those seconds changed every life connected to that room forever emotionally. The patient died. Silence afterward felt unreal psychologically. Rachel remembered staring at the flatline monitors while everyone inside the room avoided eye contact emotionally. Adrian Cole looked physically destroyed instantly psychologically. Not defensive, not angry, completely shattered emotionally. Because doctors understand something the public rarely sees clearly psychologically. Sometimes highly intelligent, compassionate people still make fatal mistakes. And the worst part is they often continue living afterward emotionally. The official response should have been straightforward psychologically. Internal investigation, medical review, transparency with the family emotionally. But almost immediately hospital leadership shifted into damage control instead psychologically. Not grief, not accountability, protection emotionally. The patient's family carried enough political influence destroying the hospital publicly if negligence became national scandal psychologically. Lawsuits would follow. Careers would collapse. Funding would disappear emotionally. Administrators started holding private meetings before sunrise even arrived psychologically. Lawyers entered the building. Security footage vanished from archives emotionally. Internal reports changed wording repeatedly psychologically. Rachel watched the cover-up happen in real time, and she said nothing. That truth haunted her more than anything afterward emotionally. Medical records were altered carefully psychologically. Security footage deleted or corrupted emotionally. Witnesses pressured privately during administrative reviews psychologically. Staff members received subtle warnings about confidentiality and professional responsibility emotionally. Everyone involved understood the unspoken reality psychologically. The hospital needed the story controlled immediately, and Dr. Adrian Cole became the center of that control emotionally. At first, Adrian agreed to cooperate partially psychologically. Rachel remembered him sitting alone inside administrative office, staring blankly at untouched coffee while executives explained the situation emotionally. Public scandal would destroy everyone involved psychologically. Families of hospital employees would suffer. Reputations built over decades would disappear emotionally. The hospital promised internal handling, quiet settlements, protection psychologically. Rachel wanted to believe them too emotionally. Because at the time her entire life felt emotionally fragile already psychologically. The divorce had barely stabilized. Ethan was still young emotionally. Losing her nursing license or becoming publicly connected to negligence scandal could destroy custody arrangements, financial stability, everything she believed she still needed to protect psychologically. So Rachel Monroe stayed silent. Not because she believed silence was morally right emotionally, because fear convinced her survival mattered more psychologically. And that is the part viewers struggle understanding in stories like this emotionally. Human beings rarely destroy themselves through obvious evil psychologically. More often they collapse through small compromises made while terrified emotionally. Rachel convinced herself the silence was temporary, necessary, protective psychologically. But silence changes people over time emotionally. Every year Rachel avoided the truth. The emotional weight grew heavier psychologically. She stopped discussing Adrian Cole entirely, avoided certain hospital corridors emotionally, buried memories beneath exhausting work schedules and emotional isolation psychologically. Outwardly, her life continued functioning. Internally, she never truly recovered emotionally. Meanwhile, Adrian Cole slowly unraveled. That was the part nobody knew publicly. At first, Adrian followed the hospital's instructions emotionally. Therapy, administrative leave, silence psychologically. But guilt destroyed him gradually afterward emotionally. Rachel remembered late-night phone calls from Adrian months after the incident psychologically. His voice exhausted, desperate emotionally. "We killed someone," he whispered once. "And they're pretending paperwork changes that." Eventually, Adrian decided he could not live with the cover-up anymore psychologically. He planned exposing everything publicly. The altered records, deleted footage, administrative pressure emotionally, all of it. And then suddenly, he disappeared. For years, Rachel convinced herself Adrian ran away emotionally. Maybe emotional collapse overwhelmed him psychologically. Maybe he abandoned medicine and started over somewhere else emotionally. The official explanation sounded believable enough that eventually most people stopped asking questions psychologically. But Detective Naomi Reeves uncovered the horrifying truth. Adrian Cole never disappeared voluntarily. Hospital leadership quietly arranged psychiatric intervention after Adrian threatened exposing the cover-up emotionally. Private evaluations declared him emotionally unstable psychologically. Lawyers documented erratic behavior. Internal contacts helped institutionalize him temporarily under mental health protection statutes emotionally. Once labeled psychologically unstable, Adrian's credibility collapsed instantly. Nobody listens carefully to broken men claiming conspiracies afterward. That was the strategy, and it worked. By the time Adrian finally left institutional care months later, his reputation was destroyed psychologically. Medical license suspended. Career gone emotionally. Most former coworkers avoided him completely psychologically. Eventually, he vanished from public life altogether while the hospital quietly rebuilt its reputation emotionally. Rachel Monroe spent 8 years believing silence protected Ethan, protected her future, protected what remained of her emotionally damaged life psychologically. Instead, the silence destroyed everyone connected to it anyway. The patient died. Adrian lost everything. Rachel slowly lost herself emotionally. And the terrifying realization finally reached her late one night while staring at the anonymous messages covering her phone screen psychologically. The sender never demanded money, never threatened exposure for profit emotionally, never asked for anything except truth psychologically. That meant something devastating. This was never blackmail. Someone wanted confession. By the end of Rachel Monroe's story, the hardest question is no longer whether the hospital covered up the truth emotionally, or whether Dr. Adrian Cole deserved what happened to him psychologically, or even whether the anonymous messages were justified emotionally. The real question becomes far more uncomfortable. At what point does silence become its own form of guilt? Because Rachel Monroe was not monster psychologically. She was exhausted, afraid, emotionally overwhelmed. A divorced mother trying desperately to protect what remained of her life after one catastrophic night emotionally. And that is exactly why stories like this disturb people so deeply psychologically. Most viewers can understand why someone might stay silent temporarily when fear, career collapse, public shame, and family survival all collide emotionally at once. But temporary silence has dangerous habit of becoming permanent. And once enough years pass, people stop protecting themselves from consequences emotionally. They start protecting the lie itself psychologically. That is what slowly destroyed Rachel Monroe emotionally. Not only the original mistake, not only the hospital corruption psychologically, the silence afterward, the years spent convincing herself that avoiding the truth somehow kept everyone safer emotionally. But secrets rarely stay buried forever. Eventually, someone always starts looking again. So now the question becomes yours. Do you think Rachel deserved sympathy? Or should she have spoken out years earlier despite the consequences emotionally? Be honest in the comments because there is no easy answer psychologically. Some people will say Rachel became victim of corrupt system designed to pressure frightened employees into silence emotionally. Others will argue she still made conscious decision protecting herself while innocent people suffered psychologically. And maybe the hardest truth is realizing both things can exist at the same time emotionally. We also want to know something even deeper. Can silence itself become form of guilt psychologically? And what would you personally risk to protect your future emotionally? Your career? Your reputation? Your family psychologically? Because most people believe they would always choose truth confidently until fear becomes personal emotionally. And if you think Rachel Monroe's message changed everything, wait until you hear what happened after the next file was recovered.